Today we will be discussing an extremely relevant sugya. And why do I say the sugya is so relevant? The topic we will be discussing is the Isser and Kitniyot lebnei Ashkenaz. Looking at the olim we have here every Sunday night, most of you seem to be Ashkenazi. At least the majority of the people sitting here, and I know some of your names. And I know that recently, in the past few years, there are some elements of our society that are starting to question the Isser of Kitniyot, and some Rabbonim say that today it is no longer relevant and one could be Mekel, and I think that is a grave mistake. And so today, first part of the Shiur, we will be discussing the concept, the Isser of Kitniyot, and in the second part of the Shiur, maybe some analysis on the importance of Minhagei Yisrael generally. So the concept of Kitniyot goes back approximately 1,000 years, and I say approximately because nobody really knows when the minhag originated. The early sources we find are Trumas Adeshen, Siman Kuf Yud Gimel, the Mordechai in Perek Arvei Psochim, and some other early Rishonim, and those Rishonim do not quote a clear source who was metaken this Isser. Obviously, it wasn't really a takana, but rather a minhag. So if we're dealing with takanas, we should know who made this takana. Was it Chachmei Mishnah, Chachmei Gemara, the Geonim? We would like to have a name. Who was metaken this takana? But bearing in mind that according to most sources, it's a minhag and not a takana, and sometimes minhagim are established by popular consent and not by certain Chachmei Yisrael who decided this will be the minhag. But the early sources indicate that it's approximately 1,000 years. We find no mention of the Isser Kitniyot in Chazal, neither in Mishnah nor in Gemara. It seems to be clear from Chazal that Chometz is only relevant when we're dealing with Chameshes Mina Dogim. Chitosa Oire Kusmin Shifon Shiboret Shual. If I'm not mistaken, in English it would be wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Yeah? It's a miracle that I remember these strange names. But Chameshes Mina Dogim Boim L'de Chimutz. Anything else can never become Chometz. But Minhag Ashkenaz is to abstain from consuming Kitniyot. We find two different reasons in the Rishonim. What is the reasoning? What is the rationale behind the Isser of Kitniyot? One is similar to a Gzeira, Ose le'ichlufe. What do Kitniyot, beans, and associated family have in common with grains, with Chameshes Mina Dogim? Their usage and the way they're used and consumed. So in many vicinities, countries, and towns in Eastern Europe, wheat was expensive, not always available, and most of the bread they ate was from corn. Even my parents tell me, what?
In Ashkenaz, there was no corn. Corn is from the New World. It's from America.
Well, for the past 500 years, there was corn in Ashkenaz. So in Eastern Europe, my parents tell me most of the bread they ate was made of corn, not of Chameshes Mina Dogim. So because these substances were used in a similar fashion as Chameshes Mina Dogim, then people might confuse this bread and that bread. And if we will permit consuming baked items or cereals. Cereal was made of corn, it was made out of rice, just like it was made out of barley or out of oats. And therefore, mechashash sheme yavo lahachlif, people might confuse this cereal with that cereal, this bread with that bread. That is why Minhag Ashkenaz was to stay away from Kitniyot. The other reasoning, the other rationale was, many times you went to the marketplace and bought a sack of corn or a sack of rice, and when you examined your purchase, you found quite a few kernels which might be chito or Sa'ira. And I was told that that is even common today, because usually the fields of rice are close to the fields of wheat, and they resemble each other, and therefore there was a chashash of taroivis. And both reasons, and both approaches are mentioned in Tumas Hadesh and Siman Kuf Yud Gimel, and in many other Rishonim, including the Bes Yosef and Siman Tov Nun Gimel. So the Bes Yosef totally disregards the Isser of Kitniyos, and that is why Spardim know nothing about the Isser of Kitniyos, and in the most frum Sephardi families, they consume and they enjoy Kitniyos on Pesach. But the Ramah, when the Bes Yosef writes that one could cook Kitniyos, the Ramah says, Yesh oisim, v'kach minhag Ashkenaz, v'ein l'shanois. So the Ramah does embrace the Isser of Kitniyos, and that is why Ashkenazim for the past 1,000 years are very harsh about the Isser of Kitniyos and Sfarim HaMekel. So one of the common problems we have today, that to my dismay in the yeshivish world, there still is an iron curtain dividing Sfardim from Ashkenazim, and it is very uncommon that an Ashkenazi ben Torah would take his son-in-law as Sfardi. But in many parts and many segments of from society, and I say that's a blessing, Baruch Hashem, Sfardi and Ashkenazi youngsters are integrated, and many people have sons-in-laws or daughters-in-laws, Sfardi families with Ashkenazi immigrants, or Ashkenazi families with Sephardi, an influx of Sephardi blood, Baruch Hashem. I wish it would be more common. And then the question comes up, could we eat Kitniyos, can't we eat Kitniyos? So not long ago, a wonderful Talmud Chacham who was so precious to me, and he's Sephardi, and he has 5 Ashkenazi son-in-laws. And he says, well, when they come to me, could they eat Kitniyos? And I say, they're the majority. You're in a quite obvious minority. So why would they eat Kitniyos and adopt your minig? Maybe it should go the other way around. So anyway, I would like to discuss. So as we said, the earliest sources of Kitniyos clearly say that is minig Ashkenaz, Tumas Hadesh, Mordechai. The Mechaber is Matio, Sif Aleph Siman Tov Nun Gimel, and the Ramah says, Ba'ashkenaz na'agu lahachmir ve'ein l'shanot. However, the Ramah writes, in 3 different areas, Kitniyos is different than Chameshes Minei Dogan. And all 3 halachas are based on that very same tshuva in Tumas Hadesh. Yes?
I want to say the North African Spartans do not also deny Kitniyos. My wife is Moroccan. The people from Morocco, Algeria, they don't eat Kitniyos. Only the East.
Okay, so first of all, I'm happy to hear that your wife is Moroccan. And what? I'm happy to hear that your wife is Moroccan. Okay, I know the Moshe for quite a while. Yes, it is interesting to note that many Moroccan communities adopted many Ashkenazi minhagim, unlike other Sephardi communities. But many Moroccan communities adopted various different minhagim, which are minhag Ashkenaz and minhag Kitniyos as well. But I think Ashkenazim are more machmir in the details, what we define as Kitniyos. I think Moroccans don't eat rice, but many things that Ashkenazim stay away from, maybe Moroccans would eat, but I'm not so familiar.
My wife, she's more Muslim than I am.
Okay, so the Ramah Paskins, there are 3 basic differences between Kitniyos and grains that could become chametz. One is Kitniyos einoi oiser nofal toich tafshil. That means Kitniyos doesn't aser a tafshil. Number 2, there is no isa hanoah from Kitniyos. Chametz of Pesach osa banoah. You could take shemen Kitniyos and use it to light Yom Tov Lech or Shabbos Lech, because it's not osa bahanoah, unlike chametz. The chumrah of Kitniyos is only regarding achila, not hanoah. So one could light candles from shemen shel Kitniyos. Number 3, you don't have to sell Kitniyos. You don't have to discard or burn Kitniyos. There is no Isser lo yaroa v'bal yamotza. And the Tumas Hadeshen, who is the source of all three halachas, clearly says, even if the origin and the reasoning of the Isser would be chashash taroivis dogon, and one could argue, if our chashash is there might be grain in the Kitniyos, so why wouldn't it aser a tafshel? Nevertheless, because it's only a chashash rochek and it's a minag, lo nahagu la'achmir elo be'ein, but it doesn't aser a tafshel. So these three halachas are not dependent on the reasoning, on either of the two different reasons that Ashkenazim are machmir b'kitniyos. It is not only if the reason is a chashash shema yavo lahachlef, even if the reason where machmir is chashash taroivis, nevertheless, the minig is only to be machmir regarding eating kitniyos be'ein, but doesn't aser tafshel. There is no Issa Noah and there's no Issa Bayero. It is interesting to note, and I can't explain why, but in Shuvas Divrei Malkiel, Chelek Dalet Simchov Beis, we find the Shtar Mechira that the Divrei Malkiel used, and he was one of the greatest Gedolim in Lithuania. He was the Rav in Lumsha, the Malkiel Tenenbaum was his name. He was a great Poisik, and Chelek Dalet Simchov Beis, we find the Shtar Mechira that he used by Mechiras Chumetz, and in that shtar he sells Kitniyos, which is strange because the Ramo, quoting the Tumas Hadeshen, say there is no issue to have Kitniyos in your home, and the explanation must be, well, after all, if the Chumrah is based on a Chashash Taroivis Dogon, then maybe even though it's not a basic halachic requirement, it's not a chiyuv, but there's room to understand why one would sell Kitniyos, but as that is not found in any poisik. So it is a chiddush that the shtar mechira of the Divrei Malkiel, Kitniyos are included. In my shtar mechira, I specifically and intentionally discluded Kitniyos because the Ramo and the major poskim say one does not have to sell Kitniyos, so I do not put it into my personal shtar mechira. So the Issa Kitniyos, I already made this comment before. Is it a takona or a minag? We find L'shonis Mischalfim. Chuvas Chasam Sorry for Chaim Kuf Chav Beis. He speaks about a takona. But it is more reasonable to assume that we're dealing with a minag and not a takona. As I said before, this takona doesn't have a father. And the Rishonim in which we find speak more about a minag, and it is not miyuchas to any one of the great Rishonim. It definitely was established after Chasimas Talmud, either in the days of the Goinim or in the days of the Rishonim, but it should be probably defined as a minag more than as a takona, even though minhagam are binding. Let's make this very clear. We find twice in Shas, Chulan Daf Tzadik Gimel Amud Beis, and Psachim Daf Nun. Psachim Daf Nun, we're dealing with about a minig regarding Erev Shabbos. Bnei Baishan abstained from traveling from Tzor to Tzidon Erev Shabbos. Tzor and Tzidon are two towns in Lebanon, in northern Israel, and they're quite close one to another. I think it's 20 kilometers between Tzor and Tzidon, 20 or 25 kilometers. And by boat, shouldn't take that long. And Bnei Baishan abstained from traveling from Tzor to Tzidon Erev Shabbos as a chumrah and as a hiris b'chilul Shabbos. And their children came before Rabbi Yochanan, and they said, our parents were rich, they were wealthy, they could afford it, but we need to take advantage of the marketplace on Erev Shabbos. So are we binded by this minig? And Rabbi Yochanan told them, minig avasechem b'yadechem, shema b'ni musaravichu v'al titishtor semecho. So we learn from this Gemara that minhagam are binding based on the posuk in Mishlei, Shema b'ni Musa v'chol titishtor semecho, and Rabbi Yochanan is the one, once again, in the Chulan Tzadik Gimel, that quotes the same posuk regarding a minig in the area of Macholas Asuras of Eva Menachai. Rabbi Yochanan says the minig is Machayev, Shema b'ni Musa v'chol v'al titishtor semecho. So the fact that I say that is a minig does not mean that there is room for kula or for leniency. Some Rishonim and Poskim maintain that the Isser of Kitniyos is only relevant if Kitniyos was exposed to water or to moisture. If it would be Chameshes Mina Dogin, there would be a Chashash Chometz. But Chazal didn't prohibit Chameshes Mina Dogin. After all, we eat matzahs. And all our matzahs must be Dogin. So how could Kitniyos be more Chomer than grain? We eat matzahs. So if we watch those Kitniyos and don't expose them to water or to moisture, why would there be Asr? Tumas Hadeshin seems clearly to say, in that case, there would be no Isser. Kitniyos is only Asr in those circumstances, in those conditions. If it would be Dogon, we would have a Chometz problem. So even though Kitniyos Me'ikar Adin is not Chometz, but we're Machmer, but Kitniyos, as if they would be proper grains. But why would Kitniyos be off limits if grain is not off limits? But the Lashon of the Ramo indicates, and that is the opinion of all later poskim, no, Kitniyos is different. Chazal couldn't prohibit grain because you wouldn't have matzahs. But when the minig was to stay away from Kitniyos, it's across the board. And we stay away from Kitniyos in any form, whether they were exposed to water or to moisture, or were not exposed. Even in those conditions, if it would be grains, there would be no chashash. We would eat it. Kitniyos, it's a paradox, but Kitniyos are chomer tvei than dagon, than actually dagon. But that is minig Ashkenaz. Now, not all the Gedolim Ashkenazim were happy about Kitniyos. Let us make this very clear. Rabbi Yankov Emden was very unhappy about the minig of Kitniyos, and he voices his dissent in Moirek Tzio. First of all, we must know the personality. Rabbi Yankov Emden was in no way a conformist, and he always voiced his opinions loud and clear, sometimes even quite harsh language. And in Moirek Tzio he writes that those Gedolim that asad Kitniyos are osad litness adin, and it says chumre de osad de kula, and iyasher cheli avatlinu, and he quotes his father that was very unhappy about the Isra of Kitniyos, the Chacham Tzvi. However, what is more important is Rabbi Yankov Emden lets out a lot of steam, but at the end of the day, he understood that this is an Issa which he cannot fight. So why were the Chacham Tzvi and Rabbi Yankov Emden so unhappy about the Issa of Kitniyos? In many ways, Achshur Dora. From life today is far more established, regulated, and has its form and substance. Kashrus is no longer in the domain of every Rav and his shtetl, which is a mala and a chesaron. I think it's more mala than chesaron. So once, matzahs were produced not by huge industries and matzah bakeries. Every little town made its matzahs. Not only every little town. Many households kashered their ovens, and they baked matzahs in the same oven all year, baked bread. Even when there was a matzah bakery in most little towns, it was the same bakery that all year produced bread, and the Rav kashered the oven and he made matzahs. There were very few professionals in the production of matzahs because Jews lived in little towns, and sometimes there was barely a minyan in a town. There was no mass communications and transportations, and the mechshoiles in matzahs were huge and very, very common. The biggest mechshel on Pesach were the matzahs, and sometimes the people that produced those matzahs were not professionals, and there was no proper pikuach and supervision, and the biggest mechshel was matzahs. So Rabbi Yankov Emden, the Chacham Tzvi, and even the some soifer voices this bad feeling that the Issa of Kitniyos brings to mechshoiles and chometz b'Pesach, because if people would eat their Kitniyos bread on Pesach there would be no chashash of chametz. But when we asked Kitniyot, and the only thing people could eat to satisfy their hunger is matzahs, and there were very many mechshoras of matzahs. So Rabbi Yankel ben the Chacham Tzvi, and even the Chassam Sofer, expresses his feeling, if all we would need is a kazayas matzah leila seder and a kazayas for Afrikoimen, there would be less chashash michshol in the matzahs that were baked. Today, this chashash is not really relevant. Everybody today could have matzahs mahadran min mahadran without any chashash pikbuk, but some gedolim, even Ashkenazi gedolim, were unhappy about the Yisuf Kitniyot. But what is more noteworthy, as I said before, is none of them dared to even try to be Kitniyot, even though they felt that the heter for Kitniyot would probably save many from Chashash Chometz B'Pesach, which is an Isser Koros and an Isser Chomer. So this just proves how serious Ashkenazi Gedolim and Ashkenazi communities took the Isser Kitniyot. B'Somem Rosh, Shin Mem Ches is the only one of the Gedolim, if we consider him one of the Gedolim. So Shas Hashu is B'Somem Rosh Shin Mem Ches. Miyuchas to the Rosh, 250 years ago, somebody printed a Sefer B'Somem Rosh, and he claimed that these are chuvas from the Rosh and some other Rishonim, B'nai Doiroi, contemporaries of the Rosh. And that Sefer at Choshev Askomis, one of them was from the Noide Biyud, the Godel Ador. But Reb Mordechai Benet, and I'm an Einikel, Reb Mordechai Benet was one of my great Zaydis going back many generations. He immediately sensed that this is a forgery, that there's nothing authentic about the Sefer, and it's a bluff and a lie. And Reb Mordechai Benet not only argued that it's forged documents, he also argued that there are tshuvas she'ein ruach hachumem noichem mehem, and there's a shemes minus in this Sefer, and he declared total war against the B'Somem Rosh. There's a Chuvah Chassam Sofer in which he brings Sefer Kizbei Harosh with a Zayin, and some publishers at later generations thought that it's a Torah Satfus. It was not a Torah Satfus. It's not that the Zayin is Chalaf Betov. There's some Sofer intentionally called the Sefer Kizbei Harosh. In our day and age, you can't get away with lies and you can't get away with forgeries. Once again, it is just because the world is far more learned and connected. Today, nobody could get away with such a stupid bluff as the B'Somem Rosh, or the Yerushalmi and Kochim, which had Haskomas from many Gedolim, and it was proven to be a bluff. So today, we know beyond doubt that the B'Somem Rosh is a forgery. So Shin Mem Ches, he's asked about Kitniyot, and he says, how come we don't know who was Matakan this Takona? And he guesses that in all the Girushim of Jews and the exiles and the Golos, and Karoim infiltrated our ranks, and the minig of Kitniyot comes from the Karaim and from the Tzedokim, because they didn't have the Mesilas of Chazal, and to them bread was bread, no matter what it was made of, whether it was made of grain or corn, and to them everything was chometz, and the minig of Kitniyot comes from the Karaim. That is what the B'Somem Rosh writes. But the Beis Meir quotes the B'Somem Rosh, and he says this only proves that the Sefer is not authentic. It says nothing about Kitniyot. The Shuva only proves that the Sefer is totally unreliable, because all Gedolei Ashkenaz embrace this minig. So that is beyond doubt. The Maram Shik, Shuvas, Orachaim, Reish Mem Aleph, writes that our minig is, even if somebody cooks Kitniyot in his home for little children, for the ill, he should have separate kalim, which is a chiddush. But that is the minig quoted by the Maram Shik. But the Ramah says that Kitniyot Eino yoisa tafshel. But that is only b'di'evet. The lashon of the Ramah and the Tumas edition is im nofar tocha tafshel eino yoisa. But lechatchila, one should have separate kelim. Some years ago, I got a very desperate call about 1 o'clock in the afternoon out of Pesach. A lady called. She's having a lot of guests to the Seder. Her mother-in-law, father-in-law, the entire family is coming. And Baruch Hashem, she finished cooking yesterday night. This morning, she put in some finishing touches. And she just realized that all the spices she used were not kosher Pesach. They were kosher, but some of them are chashash kitniyot. And those are the spices she used in everything she cooked. L'chavet Pesach. So I asked her whether you burned the chametz already. If you didn't burn the chametz yet, then first of all, burn all the wrappers that you have at home from those spices. Bal yarov, bal yamotza. Get rid of all the wrappers. And besides me and you, don't tell anybody about this mishap. And let it stay between me and you, and don't tell anybody, don't share this secret with anyone else in the family. Because the Ramo Paskan Zaino says a tafshel. Yesh la'ayin. Eino oyser is a tafshel b'mashehu. And is the kula just to say, Chometz oyser b'mashehu. Kitniyot has a din of other mecholas asuras bottle b'shishim. That is mashmin tumas adeshin. And in that case, in our case, wouldn't help. Because spices are ovid litama. And what is nice and tam is not bottle b'shishim. But the Choik Yankiv was one of the greatest achronim, argues that the lashon of the Ramah, Einoi oiser im nofel etoicha tafshil, and the Ramah doesn't say bottle b'shishim. He doesn't say you need shishim. Mashma medivra Ramah, even if it is nice and tam and there's no shishim, it still would not answer. And that is the psak of Shulchan Aruch Harav, following in the footsteps of Choik Yankov, and that's the psak of the Mishnah Brura, in accordance to the Choik Yankov. So b'shas atchak vaday yesh lahakel. Vaday yesh lahakel, because at the end of the day, even Sufik the Rabbanon lakol, and this is a minig, it's not an Issa the Rabbanon. And Moshe makes it very clear in various tshuvas, Chelek Aleph, Siman Samach, Gimel and Nigros Moshe, Sofa Kitniyot Lekola. So we definitely could rely on the Choik Yankov, Shulchan Aruch Harav, Mishnah Brura, and other achronim, that even if it is nice and tam, Kitniyot doesn't answer the tafshel. So I told that lady, just let it stay between me and you. First thing you do, take all the wrappers and throw them away. Bal yaroa, bal yamotza, and yoichlu anoven v'yezbo, kosher lePesach, lemahadrin, and that was my psak. Another question I would like to discuss was a person that suffers from celiac. And celiac is a disease which is various different degrees. People that suffer from celiac cannot eat grain. They cannot eat chameshes minadalan. Some of them could tolerate shibola chual. I don't know in English which one would be shibola chual. Oats. Some of them would tolerate oats because it has less gluten than other grains. But some of them cannot tolerate shibola chual. So people that have celiac, and the biggest problem is matzah, b'leil haseder. So some of these people, if they consume even a gram of grain, they will feel it immediately, and they will have extreme stomach pain and cramps. And some of them have milder side effects. Some of them will feel nothing. So my psak usually is, if you could tolerate, then eat a kezayis matzah. And as I made my opinion clear in Shalosh Tshuvas Minchas Osher Chelek Gimel, I do not remember which siman, but it definitely is in Chelek Gimel. I wrote a very important tshuva about Shiurei Torah, and I explained the two different sets and approaches to Shiurim, Chazon Ish and Reb Chaim Noah. and both opinions are based on a contradiction that we find between two different sets of shiurim, and I suggested suggestion number 3. And my maskona is, b'mukim de'efshar, we all like to be frum, myself included, and I am makbid shiur chazon ish. If you like matzah, why not? Go ahead. The Chazon Ish was the greatest of the Gedolim in our era. But when it's a Shas at Chak, my clear opinion is a kezayis is a kezayis. Not more. And it's as simple as that. Shir kezayis is an olive. Most of the olives sold and consumed today are quite small. So I do want to be a machmir, and that's why my psak is, shir kezayis is the bigger olives. Bigger olives. I would say it's roughly a half of an egg. You know, the bigger olives, not the very small ones. That is a shir kezayis. And when I eat cake, if it agrees with me, I eat the Chazon Ish shiur. If I bite into a piece of cake and it does not appeal to me, if I ate a shir kezayis, I would not hesitate to make a brocha me'ein sholosh. I would make an alamechya on a small piece of cake, which is as big as a kezayis, as the larger olives that are sold and consumed today, and I would make an alamechya. So, therefore, my psak is, if a person has difficulty eating matzah, if he could get away with a minimal shiur, he should eat a kezayis matzah with a brocha, al achilas matzah. If it's as big as the common zayis, not the very small ones, the bigger ones, he could make a brocha al achilas matzah v'yotzi yedei chavosoy b'shas atchak, bearing in mind sofek brochas lakola, afal piken, I would be making. But the question I want to discuss is not regarding matzah. So this person has celiac, and he says he's hungry all Pesach. How much eggs and potatoes could one eat? You know, in the average Haredi home, in the 7 days of Pesach, each member of the family eats 400 eggs and about 30 kilos of potatoes. If you ask any dietitian, it's not very healthy. Okay, so we assume, you know, it's l'shem shemayim, we'll get away with it. It's once a year. But, you know, I see families buying 25 tablets of eggs, hundreds of eggs, 1,000 eggs that a family eats in 7 days, and so much potatoes. But this individual, he says, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, he was hungry all Pesach, and he suffered because he cannot eat matzahs, and all the rest, you eat fruits, you eat vegetables, you eat a bit of potatoes, but he actually suffered all Pesach. Is there room for leniency regarding Kitniyot? And I think there definitely is. Chai Adam, Kufchov Zayin Sif Aleph writes, when he describes the Isser of Kitniyot, and like all the other Ashkenazi Gedolim, he writes, this is binding, and this is an Isser, and there's no room for leniency. However, B'shas Adcha she'ein lo ima'alechol mutar levashel Kitniyot. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Chai Adam without dissent. He doesn't bring any big book. Sif Koden Zayin Tov Nom Gimel, Mishnah Berurah quotes the Chai Adam, and the same from the Moiruk Tzio from Rabbi Yankov Emden, B'mukim she'ein lo ima'alechol mutar levashel Kitniyot. What do they mean, B'mukim she'ein lo ima'alechol? Does it mean he has nothing at home? What, he doesn't have matzahs? I would assume they mean when he doesn't have tafshilim, and that is why they write mutar levashel Kitniyot, which means he has matzah, he has dessert, but he has no cooked food, the main dish. It has nothing besides Kitniyot for the main dish. And the Chai Adam and the Mishnah Berurah are matir. I don't think it's reasonable to understand Ein lo ma yochal, he has nothing at home. What? If he has nothing to eat, he's going to die from hunger. Person can't fast 7 days. So I assume their kavona, b'mukim she'ein alechol mutar levashel kitniyos. Why does he write mutar levashel kitniyos? Why doesn't he say mutar lechol kitniyos? I think what they mean is he probably has matzah. Every Jew has matzah. But he has no substantial food besides kitniyos. Mutar levashel kitniyos. Sha'atzin Sivkot Yud, the Mishnah Berurah writes, Yadua shekame gedolim hekelu b'shnas b'tzoros. He doesn't quote sources, but the Mishnah Berurah quotes that gedolim were mekel b'shnas b'tzoros. So once again, shnas b'tzoros is a famine, but people eat. Most people don't die from hunger. I don't know precisely whom he means, but I am aware of 2 very substantial tshuvas from great poskim. Shoyle Meshev, Madura Beis Chelek Dalet Simen Kuf Chof Ches. Shoyle Meshev writes, this year, he was the posik ador in his time, Rabbi Yosef Shor Natan's son. He was the Rav in Lemberg, one of the great Gedolim of Gilitz, and he was the posik ador. And he writes this year, I don't know which year, Chaval, because it would be an interesting historical document. But the Shoyle Meshev usually doesn't write dates. But he writes, this year, there was a very bad financial state. And many of the rich members of our community, Yordu min Nechaseyim. And we have a big problem with Kimcha de Pischa for the Aniyim. And he paskins, this year the Aniyim could eat Kitniyos because we don't have enough to provide for the entire community. Because the financial situation is not good, and many of the wealthy members had a bad year. So his argument is, imetiru lahachal es aniyim demai is tevel midrabanan. Demai midrabanan necessitates a froshes tumas amaisis. So all you have to do is take off tumas amaisis. That's all. Chazal were mekel lahachal es aniyim demai. Kal v'choimer we could give for aniyim kitniyos. That's what the Shoyle Meshev argues. One could say that's a shvacha argument. It's at the economy of Chedes regarding the Mai, because Rav Aniyim Masim. None of the poskim make a point. Maybe we could be machal la'aniyim other macholas asuras derabanan. No, nobody ever asked him that basa of b'cholov is mutar la'aniyim or tevel b'zman hazeh. Tumas amais is zman hazeh derabanan mutar la'aniyim. So the Mai, for some reason, is an exception. And no posek learns from Demai to be lenient with other macholas asuras that are born on by aniyim. But after all, that's the Shoyle Meshev. And one could argue, so maybe Demai is an exception, but Kitniyos is only a minig, and it's not reasonable that a Nisa D'Rabbanan would be more cooler than Kitniyos. After all, Kitniyos is not a Nisa D'Rabbanan, it's a minag. And minig which was established in later generations. So if Chazal were makel by Demai, one could be makel by Kitniyos. That's a Shoyle Meshev. The other, once again, is the Divrei Malkiel. Chelek Aleph Siman Chof Ches, he has a lengthy tshuva. His argument is, minhagim are based on consent. So we could be medame minhagim to nedorim. And benedorim we rely on a umdina adate de hocheloi nodar. It's reasonable to assume that when Klal Yisrael, Ashkenaz Ashkenaz were makabel the minig of Kitniyos, they weren't makabel the minig in extreme cases of famine or for aniyim, and therefore the Divrei Malkiel, like the Shoyle Meshev, when the financial going is bad, he is mekel la'aniyim. And his argument is, adata dohocha loy nodar, adata dohocha lo kiblu alatzmam. And then the Mishnah Berurah writes, Pashut sheyesh lohoka lachoyle she'ein bo sakana. And I think that is also a powerful argument. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't quote this from many achronim. It's his own argument. Choyle she'ein bo sakana, we could be mekel kitniyos. Why is it so poshut? Because Chodesh Beskon is different than Aniyim. And in many sources in Eilocha we find Chazal were Mekel v'derabona l'choyle Shem Sakona. Hilchas Shabbos Shin Chof Ches Sif Yud Zayin, there are 2 days. One day is we're lenient with all the Shavusim regarding Choyle Shem Sakona. Shulchan Aruch is Machmir. We are only Mater Amira Lenochli, not other Shavusim. Gemor Mefreshes Psochim Chof Heil Mid Beis. Shelo kederach Achile, shelo kederach Hanua, Mutar l'choyle Shem Sakona. Where else do we find the Kula B'choyle Shem B'Sakona? Daled Taniyos, even Tisha B'Av. Tov Kuf Nun Daled and Shulchan Aruch is Mutar l'choyle Shem B'Sakona. So if we're makel by Daled Tzoymis, which are Tekonos Nevi'im, we're makel by Shvusim and Shabbos, we're makel Shelo Kederach Achila in Mesechet Psochim, then by definitely we could be makel b'choyle regarding Kitniyos. Would that apply to our case of a choyle tzeliak? No, I don't think so. It has nothing to do with the din of choyle. Why not? Who is defined as a choyle? This is a major discussion regarding Hilchas Shabbos, only nofal mishkav or choyle kol gufoi. Not everybody that has a medical condition would be defined as a choyle in Hilchas Shabbos. However, I wrote various different shuvas, and I think Bedinei Tzoymois or Shar Darabbanans, this requirement is not needed. This is only by Shabbos, because in Loinof Alamishkav Chazal B'chlal Aserd administering medicine, Shami Yishrik Samamoni. So by Shabbos we must find a compromise. Which Choyle Shem B'Sekona are we Mekel Shavusim? And which Choyle Shem B'Sekona we B'chlal Aser even taking medicine? So we must find some compromise, and the compromise is Nofal HaMishkav. Regarding other halachas, anybody that has a medical condition. However, a medical condition which causes him a need to eat. He's shvach. He's ill. He's weaker than other people. He's not feeling well. He'll feel better if he could eat. But this person that has celiac, as long as he doesn't eat grain, he is healthy as anyone else. He doesn't have the flu. He doesn't have a bad cold. He doesn't have a fever. He's not shvach. He's not staying home. As long as he doesn't partake and eat grains, he is as healthy as anyone else, as strong as anyone else. His problem is he doesn't have what to eat and he's hungry. So the problem we're dealing with is not an ailment. It's not a sickness. The problem we're dealing with is hunger. So we cannot rely on any leniency regarding the din of choyle. But on the other hand, I do argue, Loi gora ma'aniyim, Loi gora memisha ein loi ma'alechoil. He fits the criteria of ein loi ma'alechoil. And it's bittul simchas yantiv. And b'mokoim, that a person will suffer from hunger all 7 yemei hachag, and it's a bittul of mitzvah simchas yantiv, loi gazru. And I would be lenient regarding kidneys. I am aware that probably the person did not rely on my heter. I am aware of that. And I think it's good. It's good. Because for an Ashkenazi frum Jew to eat kidneys is, I wouldn't say it's like eating chasa, chas v'sholom. We do need to have our priorities right. But I think he would prefer try to push himself in eating some more eggs and more potatoes and more apples and oranges and whatever it is, and not to eat kidneys. But by pure halachic ruling and halachic criteria, I say in these circumstances and in that condition, one could eat kidneys. So I think it all boils down to one line. When there is no reason to be makel, kidneys is an isa gomer ve'ein lahakol bayrash. When there is reason to be makel, we could be makel far more than by any Isser Derabanan, as I proved for various different sources.
What about Shabbat after? What's happening this year?
Yes, that is a totally different sugya, which I did not plan to speak about today, but this year, Shabbos comes right after Shavuot Shel Pesach. Could one prepare Kitniyot Erev Yom Tov, Erev Shavuot Shel Pesach, or Shavuot Shel Pesach, relying on Erev Tavshilin? That is a very interesting question. And it comes up many times when a person makes a Shalom Zocher, Shabbos after Pesach. How could you have a Shalom Zocher without Arbus? You're not Yaitza. And the baby wouldn't forgive you when he will become aware in due time that there was no Arbus on his Shalom Zocher. So could you prepare Arbus, which is definitely Kitniyos, the Kuli Alma, and cook Arbus to have by the Shalom Zocher Shabbos by night? It's no longer Pesach. But could you prepare those Arbus? And this touches upon various different sugyas. Would it be muktzah on Yom Tov? Would Erev Tavshilin apply? Because Erev Tavshilin is based on Hoel ve'Mikla le'orchim. Well, there's always a chance that some Sephardi guests might come in, and Sephardim could eat Kitniyos on Yom Tov. So yes, the psak is you could prepare Kitniyos for Shabbos after Yom Tov. It could be done.
Chronic medicines that have Kitniyot in them?
Yes, when we're dealing with medicines, if we're dealing with capsules that one swallows and not chewables that have an appealing taste, one could take any medicine on Pesach. That have Kitniyos, definitely. Even medicines that might have a Cheshash Chometz. If it's not really essential, skip it. If you could have an equivalent medicine that's kosher la Pesach, take it. But when we're dealing with life-saving medicines, one should not even try to change his medicine. And one could take medicines if he really has a life-threatening condition, even medicines that have a Cheshash Chometz, kal v'chomer. Medicines that have a Cheshash Kitniyos are no issue and no problem at all. Yes.
Like a capsule, which is.
I understand the Inyan of minig if you have a particular area which is made one way because there's a chashash. So then it becomes a minig, and even though in this particular place it does not lie, so we don't want to change the minig of Yisrael. But we're talking 1 generation, 10 generations later, because they were knowing 10 generations before when it was relevant. Today it's not relevant. Why can't we just say this minig just doesn't exist? Because no one would do it just because they did it 10 generations ago. It's a new world, basically. It's a theoretical question. I'm not trying to suggest any practical changes.
It's a new... Yes, I like... First of all, Mr. Rosenbaum, you're a man of words and you express yourself very clearly. And I would say it's a new world with ancient values and ethics and minhagim. That is our world. And that is our greatness. A new world with ancient values, ethics, norms, and customs that we cherish and we cling on to. Yes, that is what makes us unique. So minhagim are binding, and maybe we should dedicate a special shiur to Toras HaMinhag, and we will differentiate different criterias of minhagim. Basically, minhag is about minhag hamokoim, and then there's a question of minhag avos. Are they the same or two different concepts? Very interesting ha'ora, very interesting comment. Magen Avraham in Mesamach quotes Kisvei Ha'ari, and the Magen Avraham very commonly quotes Kisvei Ha'ari, and that he speaks about Nusach HaTfilah, and that he says a person should never change the Nusach HaTfilah of his forefathers And when the Magen Avraham quotes that he quotes in Bilshoinoi, he changes one word. Instead of minig avois, minig hamokoin. And that is noteworthy because he quotes the Lashon of the Ari, changes one word, which proves that the Magen Avraham feels that minig avois actually means minig hamokoin. For hundreds of years, people lived in the same shtetelach and same towns because, yes, it was an old world, a world without mass transportation and communications, and it was only natural. If Jews weren't uprooted and hounded and chased and persecuted, then they lived in the same shtetl. So minig avois actually is minig hamokoin. And most poskim say that the fact your father had a minig is not machayah the children to adhere to the same minhagim. However, when we're speaking about the minig of an Eidah, that's different. And that is what is unique about Kitniyot. As the Ramo puts it, as the Tumas Hadeshin puts it, it is a minig kehilos Ashkenaz. So wherever they went, but there was still kehilos Ashkenaz, and they adhered to this minig. And yes, minhagim are binding, even though maybe in a changing world they would be less relevant, but they're still binding. I also think that I mentioned before, at least one of the two reasonings of this minig is still relevant. Because even in our day of technological advance, but when you buy quantities of rice and peeled corn, sometimes you have kernels of grains in those sacks, even today. And I checked this with professionals in the field. So even today, yes, there is a teroivis of grains sometimes in various different types of kidneys. Well, I am convinced that the Svardim that eat kidneys on Pesach have special kidneys kosher of Pesach, which are definitely foolproof, and they don't eat chometz on Pesach, and they don't have oats or barley in their kidneys. I'm very well aware of that. However, we cannot say that the minig is no longer relevant. Basically, it is relevant. The fact that you have a good hechsher wouldn't change minig Ashkenaz. Even today, if it's not kosher la Pesach, it would be common to have other grains in rice or in other forms of kidneys.
Are there variations in the definition of Kitniyot?
Of course there are.
In
Of
London,
course there are.
some
I
Kitniyot-
think somebody made a comment. Oh, he left. I think it was Moshe Kaplan. Or maybe someone else made this comment. Corn is not a European breed. Who made that comment?
That was made from there.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, you made it.
That's it.
So the Moshe's approach is that Kitniyot is only those species that were available and common 1,000 years ago, when this takana was established. And that is why the Moshe says you could eat peanuts on Pesach, and peanuts would not be defined as Kitniyot, because peanuts came from the New World back to Europe. And the Moshe says that is why potatoes are permitted, even though people even today use potato starch, and they make cookies and cakes Pesach out of potato starch. So why wouldn't potatoes be Kitniyot? So the Moshe says because potatoes, like peanuts, were discovered by the Spaniards, Christopher Columbus and some of his friends that discovered the New World, the Americas, and they brought potatoes back to Europe, and therefore potatoes are not Kitniyot, and neither are peanuts. That's the Moshe's approach. But I think that's a mistake, because same applies to corn. Corn is not a European species, and corn was brought from America to Europe roughly the same time that potatoes were brought from the Americas to Europe. And the same applies to quinoa. Quinoa was not known in North America, comes from Western South America, from the Inca, who used quinoa. And in the last 20 or 30 years, it became very popular in the modern world, in America and in Israel as well. So according to the Moshe, quinoa would not be defined as kitniyos, but neither would corn. And all the poskim say that corn is definitely kitniyos, which disputes the Moshe's approach. In my opinion, the Rishonim never compiled a list what is kitniyos. There were no lists. If there would be a list, we would have it. And none of the Rishonim that we have give us a list what is kitniyos and what is not. So in my opinion, bearing in mind that it wasn't a takana, but rather a minig, the minig was all forms of kitniyos which are used in a similar way as grains, starch, grains that are used for cooking cereal or baking bread were included in the prohibition of kitniyos, without specifying exactly which they are. And therefore, it is not relevant whether a certain species was available in Europe 1,000 years ago or not. Corn wasn't available in Europe 1,000 years ago, and it is kitniyos. And there are many different approaches in the Achronim why potatoes are not kitniyos. I think the most reasonable approach is just because of their size. They don't resemble grains. The common denominator of all chameshes mina dogan is they're small. So corn, rice, beans are approximately more or less the same size as grains. One potato is as big as 500 kernels of barley or wheat or oats. And all the others grow al pnei soda. Potatoes grow underground. And therefore potatoes are very different than grains. And that is why potatoes are not kitniyos. Regardless of the fact, were there potatoes 1,000 years ago in Europe? That's not the point, and therefore I disagree with Rav Moshe and his basic approach to kitniyos. So I think quinoa would be kitniyos. But still, if somebody has to be makel, better to be makel by quinoa and by suffolk kitniyos than by beans, corn, rice, which is universally agreed by all the poskim that they are defined as kitniyos. Suffolk kitniyos one definitely could be more makel. So we discussed the sugya of kitniyos, ma'inyan la'inyan ba'oisi o'inyan, and I think we dealt with very interesting shaylas. But I want to come back to the introduction to today's shiur. Shema b'ni Musa Ravicho v'al titishtoy semecho, and minhagim are extremely important. One cannot overstate the importance of minhagim, and many times I say that Yiddishkeit is not only about halacha. Yiddishkeit is about halacha and mesoros, and those are the two pillars of the entire building. Those are the two pillars of our entire system. It is halacha and mesoros. And many times people say, I want to know whether it's halacha. And I do not respond. And I say, it's not relevant. And I don't have to fulfill your curiosity, or I just want to know whether it's halacha. Minig is halacha. Because Rabbi Yochanan was the greatest Amoira. And Rabbi Yochanan paskin that minhagim are binding. Divrei Kabbalah, Shema b'ni Musa Ravicho v'al titishtoy semecho. So minhagim are binding. So when a person wants to differentiate, is it halacha? Of course it's halacha. Minhagim are halacha. And the mesoros is as important as other areas of halacha. But Pesach, I think we find a very special emphasis on minhagim beyond what we find in any other Yom Tov, any other time of the year. Why is that? So I share with you just a feeling, libi yoimali. And what merit were we salvaged from Golas Mitzrayim? Wasn't about halacha. was before Matan Torah. We had no halachas. And Chazal teach us, Shaloshinu was L'shoinam, es Levusham, es Shemam. That was all about tradition. It was all about minhag. It couldn't have been anything else because we had no halachas. It was before Matan Torah. But we had minhagim. We had tradition. Avraham Avinu kiyam kol haTorah kulan shelo nitnu. There was no chiyuv. Avraham wasn't Machiyuv, neither was Yitzchak, nor was Yaakov, and nor was anyone else until Matan Torah, until Nasa and Ishma. So what brought us out of Golas Mitzrayim was only tradition, was only Nesodus, was only the Minhagim. And we fiercely clinged down to those Minhagim. And in more than 200 years of Golas, generation after generation, Loishin was Shemam, Loishin was Levusham, Loishin was L'shoinam, and those were Minhagim. That was only tradition. That was only the ways of our fathers and forefathers. And that is why Pesach, there is special emphasis on Minhagim. Whether it's Kitniyot or it's many other Minhagim. Shruya. So Hasidim don't eat Shruya. And Hasidim are very makbid about not eating Shruya. And I think the reason Minhag has so much room and so much emphasis, Shruya is gebrocht, in Lashon Kodesh. So my feeling is, why are Minhagim so important, especially Pesach? Because that is how we got to have Pesach. And that is how we were zoiche to Geulas Mitzrayim. It is only in the schus of Minhagim and Klal Yisrael clinging, desperately clinging, with all its power to the Minhagim of our Avos, of our forefathers, and that is why we find Toras and Minig so much more in Pesach than at any other time of the year. So we should be zoicha to go b'darkei Avos. And Chazal say, Kol ha'olech b'darkei Avos ani miskoyim olo b'schus Avos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu should remember Chazdei Avos and schus Avos, u'beglal Avos toshia bonim v'sovei geula levnei b'neihem, b'bias goel tzedek b'mheru v'yameinu omein.